Thanks for your time and welcome to the Pinnacle Insight series focusing on global equities. Now, many of you would know Firetrail as a high conviction Aussie equity manager, but in the last 6 months, we've launched our first global equities offering under Firetrail. Now, I've got to say, it's been a passion of mine for the last 4 years since we've started Firetrail to set up and manage a global equities product. And if you look back to when we first launched, the founders of Firetrail, we had a lot of global equity experience. If we go back through my journey, I've got over 30 years global equities experience. In fact, I launched and also managed Macquarie's first global equities product way back in 1990. I spent a bit of time in the UK and we set up a UK equities business managing both UK and European equities. I set up a Hong Kong business managing large cap Hong Kong stocks as well as broader Asian securities. Over the past 18 months, we've broadly completed the team rebuild. We've hired 14 experts, most of which are spending 100% of their time in the global equities product. And when COVID settles down, I'll be very pleased to introduce you to many of these senior members face-to-face in coming months. But both James Miller and I are very proud to really introduce you today to the Firetrail S3 Global Opportunities Fund. And there's 3 key areas we'd like to cover. First and foremost, what is the fund? It's a global high conviction fund, and we'll spend a few minutes about what exactly it does. Point 2 is important. It really focuses the vast majority of the alpha opportunities in this segment of the market we call positive change. And again, if I look back through my career, some of the bigger alpha opportunities we've achieved under Firetrail and Macquarie, they're achieved when companies were undergoing significant positive change. If it works as well as we expect, then these companies get significant earnings re-ratings, they get valuation re-ratings, and you're buying a group of companies that are seeking a better place for the future, future for the planet. The third area is this fund is incredibly different to the underlying world equity index. And it's also very different to most other global equity managers. Our aim is to significantly outperform the MSCI Global Index and at the same time provide significant and sustainable benefits for you and your clients. And here's what you need to know about the S3 Global Fund. It's a highly concentrated fund of our very best 30 international ideas. It's highly active with an active share of around 95%. And as I mentioned before, it's very different to the underlying global index, but it's also very different to most other global equity offerings. We have very little exposure to those mega cap tech names that most of our peers or competitors have. We're finding significant opportunities in that undiscovered or under-researched segment of the market. And those particular stocks are providing most of the alpha for the fund. Point 3 is what Firetrail is good at. At the end of the day, we are a fundamental shop looking at the bottom-up stock picking opportunities. We focus on the two or three things that matter, that drive the earnings and will drive the future share price. Nothing has changed when we go global. It's exactly the same. And we also make sure we have a good mix of value companies and a good mix of growth companies. But I think one key area that is a differentiating factor of our global fund is we're seeking most of the alpha opportunities in what we call positive change. These companies where we expect the significant outperformance, not only in terms of profitability in the future, but these companies are contributing or big contributors to making the planet a better place. And again, James will go through this component of positive change in quite a bit of detail. But at the end of the day, we're bringing our high conviction expertise to global equities. Now, the key point when you're going global is how do you distill 20,000 potential opportunities to a reasonable universe that you can do that fundamental research on. Effectively, over the past 2 years, we've recalibrated the global MSCI Global Index into 3 particular categories, and you can see that on the left-hand side. And I'll go through each of those briefly in a moment. James will also go through the sustainable themes we've added to this portfolio a bit later in the presentation. But when you look at the laggards are companies that we believe, looking forward from a fundamental standpoint, their business models are unsustainable over the medium to long term. Now, believe it or not, in the MSCI Global benchmark, over 25% of companies listed in that benchmark in our view, are unsustainable over the medium to long term. It's generally because the management don't have the will or the ability to seek out that positive change. These companies generally trade at a discount because their earnings are struggling and their business models aren't sufficient enough. And as a result, we're incredibly comfortable to be effectively zero weight those laggards. Now, the big opportunity is the middle segment, those future leaders. These are generally overlooked by most investors and generally they're out of favour. But if you look forward and you have patience, many of these future leaders will be industry leaders of their underlying industry. Once that positive change is effected, you do get that earnings re-rating, you get that valuation re-rating. And right now in our S3 Global Fund, we have 18 future leader opportunities. And James will talk about two of our very best ones later in the presentation. And then the third category are those current leaders, those leaders, those companies that have sustainable business models today, have solid earnings, but a lot of them are still cheap versus their peer group or versus other metrics. So we have 11 what we call current leaders in the portfolio as well. But getting back down to that original question, how do you distill 20,000 securities into a universe that we can then do the fundamental research on? Well, again, over the past 3 years, we've set up a series of proprietary risk systems to effectively distill 20,000 securities down to 800. And how we do that is we've got 350 both financial and non-financial metrics to get those securities down to an investable level, which is 800 potential opportunities. And at that point, we do what we do best at Firetrail. We sit down, do that deep dive fundamental research and uncover the 30 best investment opportunities in the global benchmark. Now, with that, I might hand quickly to James, and he'll cover three areas. Firstly, what does S3 stand for? Secondly, he'll talk about the two future leader opportunities. And then finally, he'll talk about the number of sustainable themes we have within the portfolio. So over to you, James.
Thanks, Paddy. Now, no matter whether we are talking about the future leaders within the fund or the current leaders within the fund, they all share three similar characteristics. And this is where the S3 from the S3 Global Opportunities Fund comes from. The first one is that all the companies we're looking for have sustainable business models. We're looking 5 years forward and finding companies that are not only surviving, but also thriving in that time period. The second one is sustainable earnings. Right now, there's a lot of just stocks out there in the market that are stories. We need to see that fundamental pathway to strong earnings coming through. And finally, as Paddy touched on, we've found a huge opportunity in sustainable positive change, finding those current and future leaders and avoiding the laggards. What you can see if you draw your eyes to the left-hand side of this slide here is some of the stocks that we hold within the portfolio. You have everything from Volkswagen, which is a traditional automaker, the start of its journey into positive change through the development of electric vehicles, right through to MSCI, a sustainable data provider and index provider with earnings upside. What I'd like to do right now is touch on two of these stocks to show you how this really is a global high conviction fund with a sustainable edge. The first company I would like to talk about is Weyerhaeuser. Weyerhaeuser was founded by Friedrich Weyerhaeuser way back in 1900. And it has one of the simplest business models that we've come across. The company grows trees, and then sustainably harvests those trees, and the wood or timber is then used in building houses in North America. Now, when we analyze Weyerhaeuser, we've seen two things that matter, and these two things are great opportunities. The first opportunity is in the timber price staying higher for longer. Since the beginning of the pandemic, with the building boom, the lumber price in the US has more than doubled, and this flows straight down through to earnings for Weyerhaeuser. The reason we see this as being sustainably higher for longer is that timber is one of the most supply-constrained commodities we can think of. To sustainably harvest a tree, that tree needs to be growing for 30 years. I can't think of any other commodity like that. Now, that's an exciting opportunity, and it drives the 6% dividend yield in the company right now. But what's even more exciting is the opportunity in carbon reduction. Now, when I said Weyerhaeuser grows trees, it grows a lot of trees. In fact, the size of its forests is more than 1.5 times the size of Tasmania. Each year, those trees suck 32 million tonnes of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's equivalent to 3 times the annual emissions of Qantas's jets flying around Australia and the globe. What we have learned over the past few years is the value of these carbon emissions. And Europe is the leader in the space. Emissions there right now are priced at around $100 US per tonne. Now, I'm not saying Weyerhaeuser is going to go out right now and start earning $3 billion just from growing trees, but it is an unpriced and unrealised opportunity for Weyerhaeuser that's starting to come through. Weyerhaeuser is a company with 45% valuation upside, sitting there undiscovered in the timber REIT sector in the US, and it's a future leader with undiscovered growth. Exactly the kind of company that we look for the portfolio. The second opportunity I would like to talk about today is a company called International Flavours and Fragrances, or IFF. Now, you might not have heard of the company, but you almost certainly have dozens, if not hundreds, of its products within your home. What IFF does is it makes the ingredients behind your household consumer products, making your shampoo smell good, making your deodorant smell good, and making your biscuits taste good as well. It's that secret sauce behind all those products. And it's one of 3 players globally in the industry controlling the majority of the market share. Now, these 3 players, it's a consolidated industry, and they all do largely the same thing. They have pricing power because there's no alternatives, and they're protected against inflation because they can pass that cost right on through. The opportunity for IFF right now is that it is very cheap versus peers, Simrise and Gaborden. It trades at a 45% discount to those 2 peers who trade in Europe. Now, the reason for that is threefold. For the past 5 to 10 years, the company's had poor sales execution, it's lacked cost control, and it needed a shake-up of its management team and governance. The reason we like IFF right now is that the catalysts are starting to come through. We're seeing the old CEO being replaced. New CEO, Frank Clyburn, is coming in. He ran oncology at Merck and did a great job in growing that business. We're also getting an independent chairman coming into the company. And we believe that they are the people to really start shaking up the business and getting it more in line with its European peers. IFF has 55% valuation upside, with earnings upside as well, and is a future leader with clear catalysts. Now, those were 2 of the companies within the portfolio. And what you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here is some of the other names within the portfolio. What you will see with all of the names in the portfolio is that they all fit into one of our 4 sustainable opportunity themes, either helping people in the future through health and well-being improvement, or innovation and equality progress, or the planet. Climate impact gets talked about a lot, gets a lot of airtime, but also sustainable world, reducing waste. And core being in the portfolio as the world's leading provider of biodegradable bioplastics is a great example there. And many of you may know Firetrail, and what it's worth reiterating is that we are all about fundamental deep dive research. What we do day to day is we go out, we're talking to management teams, divisional management, competitors, industry experts. We're doing that to find the opportunities that others may have missed. We're building a truly high conviction global portfolio full of current and future leaders out there in the fund and avoiding the laggards. This portfolio also has the characteristics to back that up. And I'll hand back to Paddy now to take you through some of the metrics behind our 30 best global positive change ideas.
Great. Thanks, James. But as you can see on the chart here, first and foremost, on the characteristics, the fund is highly active. We only have 29 global equity opportunities right now. The active share is around 95%. And as you would know from Firetrail, we always remain fully invested, so we have full exposure to the market. If you look at it from a valuation standpoint, right now the portfolio is better value or cheaper than the underlying global index, which highlights our focus on valuation. At the end of the day, Firetrail is a valuation manager. If you look at it from a earnings per share or earnings per share growth perspective, we've got much stronger growth looking out 3 or 4 years than the underlying benchmark. Again, a focus on future earnings and a focus on that deep dive fundamental research. But the final commitment is we're ensuring right now our fund will always have at least 30% lower emissions than the current underlying global index. And we're very confident with the current portfolio we have today, working with management and getting clear on their emissions targets, that in 3 to 4 years' time, this 70% lower than the market is likely to be 30% lower than the market is likely to be 70% in 3 or 4 years' time. How do we do that? We're actively working with management to ensure their targets are realistic, and we're also monitoring to ensure they're achieving their targets. But we're doing this without diluting any alpha opportunities within the portfolio. So what you're getting with Firetrail S3 Global is a highly active fund, that it's better value than the underlying benchmark, higher earnings growth than the underlying benchmark, with lower emissions. So again, thank you very much for your time today. I really am proud to introduce you to the Firetrail S3 Global Opportunities Fund. It is a global high conviction fund focusing on positive change opportunities for that alpha generation component. Our aim is to significantly outperform the market over the medium term and at the same time have significantly lower emissions than the underlying index. Our belief is you should strive for both high alpha as well as a better planet. You don't have to choose anymore. You can actually have both. Now, as I mentioned early in the presentation, the fund's been live and running for about 3 months now, and we're incredibly pleased with the early performance. We're up about 4% relative to the underlying benchmark over that period, and it's been quite a challenging market environment. We've also presented this a number of times to our institutional clients. We've won our first client. We have a second one coming in very soon, and we're hoping to get 3 or 4 more institutional clients in coming weeks and months. So again, thanks very much for your time. I now invite you and your clients to invest alongside both myself, James, and the whole Firetrail team in the Firetrail S3 Global Opportunities Fund. Thank you.